I'm going to introduce our panel. First off, we have Chris Bowie. He's the Senior Program Officer for the Colorado Health Foundation. Give him a big wave there, Chris. He's been involved in the field of public health and healthcare for more than 12 years, and he cites the role of health advocacy and its impact on changing lives as the key driver for promoting public health. He's a licensed attorney and activist. He helped launch the Denver Medical Legal Partnership, which is dedicated to eliminating social and economic barriers impacting our communities. He's worked to foster collaboration between healthcare providers, other legal professionals, and community leaders to alleviate adverse health outcomes for the most vulnerable Coloradans. He works directly with communities in Eagle County. A Colorado resident since 2007, Chris and his wife, Allison Grace, have 2 young children who he just told me are blowing him away on the computer, as we all know, the digital natives. Then they each love to adventure anywhere that life takes them. Okay, next we have Tila Larson. She's the manager of programs for GOCO, and she works with Colorado communities to advance opportunities for outdoor recreation, conservation, and equity. Before she joined GOCO, Tila spent a decade with the city of Colorado Springs. She earned her JD in environmental law from Lewis and Clark College in Oregon. She was born and raised in Wisconsin and is based in Colorado Springs. She enjoys spending time with friends and family, seeing live music, enjoying food, and traveling for new adventures. Give them a big wave there, Tila. And then we have Dan Umasta. He is the program officer for North Central at GOCO. And he was born and raised in Colorado and brings a strong passion for outdoor recreation and conserving wild places. Before joining GOCO, Dan served as the grassroots coordinator for Colorado Trout Unlimited. He's lived and played in Gunnison and Buena Vista for over 10 years. He graduated from the University of Colorado with a BA in political science and a certificate from the Center of the American West. He enjoys fishing, skiing, rafting, and hiking with his wife, Jenny, and their rambunctious chocolate lab tarpon.
Yeah, tarpon, saltwater fish.
Yeah, so give a big wave up there. And I'm Robin Thompson, and I am the facilitator for the Nonprofit Learning Series. I am a nonprofit consultant. I am based here in Eagle County, and I do work with organizations not only in Eagle County, but all across the country, and I even have a couple of international clients. And like I said, this is a labor of love, and I'm so excited to see all your faces here today and excited to hear what the panel has to tell us today. And if you have questions, you can put them in the chat or you can put them in the Q&A feature, whichever one you want to, and I'll be monitoring those as we go. Or if you want to raise your hand and unmute yourself, we can do that too. Okay, so let's start with you, Chris. And why don't you tell us a little bit about the Colorado Health Trust, the mission, the vision, the goals, etc.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Nice to meet everyone. Thanks for this time. Colorado Health Foundation. I think I just want to start out with we have health in our name, but we're not primarily or explicitly just about health or healthcare. We are a private foundation. We are a result of we're a conversion foundation after 2 healthcare entities in the early 2000s or late 1990s actually merged, and then we were able to utilize some of those funds through various creative investment forms to create a stronger endowment and grow our capital. And so we are only accountable to ourselves because we don't have benefactors, we don't have donors, we don't rely on that, which is really nice because we get to set our own agendas, our way of helping the community. We are really accountable to ourselves, our board, our grantees, and our community here in Colorado. And so that's the big piece. With all that comes a lot of accountability and responsibility to maintain a high level of work and support to our communities. The biggest thing that I would say is that while we are a health foundation, we are really about the idea of equity, about the idea of looking at how the community works, racial justice and inequities, power dynamics, and ideas of innovation, things that are trying to do things differently. We're really, again, we have the luxury to be able to explore, and with a lot of success, there's also a lot of failure out in community, and we don't view that as a negative. I think the big piece for us is how do we take all of that, both good and bad, as learning points and data points for us to be able to evolve our own view of community and how we can provide support to community. We've got really big focus on our cornerstones, which there's 3 of them. We really have our work really centered on how we're community informed. And when I say we, that includes grantees, how community is involved in the process. We don't want to have the typical, and I come from the public health world, and sorry for any public health folks if I offend y'all, but we are notorious for parachuting into communities, spouting a lot of data off and expecting the community to understand, and then also fall in line with what we want to do without really getting any input or true feedback from the community. We're trying to avoid that here. The other piece is that we really want to make sure that our work is really grounded in health equity. And when I say health equity, it's kind of like the nebulous of calling something like irritable bowel syndrome. Like it encompasses everything, right? Like you hear housing, it encompasses everything. And so it's more about the rationale and the reasoning for why and how you view your work as impacting the community. We'll find a way to tie in health some way, unless it's something like adopting cats. But then again, there's a mental health benefit to that, I'm sure. Like we could probably get creative with that. And the other piece is that we're really working with communities and parts of the population that have historically not had a lot of power and privilege, most often living on low income, and in many cases have a racial component that has led to those inequities. And so it's not to say that we are only funding communities of color or only low income, but we are factoring that in as part of our work in our line of thinking. We also have components of, we have different areas that we look at in terms of like maintaining healthy bodies, nurturing healthy minds, strengthening community health, and championing health equity. So there's a lot of pieces, again, where we start to have layers of how you can fit in and how we look at the community and the community's work. Something that we're trying to do, though, and wanting to call this out, is we're really adjusting to not having we will always have open funding opportunities, but we're trying to look at not necessarily boxing the community into certain topical areas, because we know that the community operates a lot differently than what we would view as a foundation. So we're trying to figure out that balance of what is going on in community, what are we looking for, and then also what is this creative space that we can start getting into. And I'll stop there. I could probably just keep rambling, but I'll stop there.
Well, great. And, what I like is that, Chris, it's so down to earth, like you're looking for ways to work with us in the community. So thank you for giving us that broad overview, and we'll dive more into that here in just a few minutes. So thank you.
Of course.
And so Tila or Dan, which one of you all want to talk a little bit about GOCO and the mission, the vision, and the goals?
A quick intro to GOCO, and I'm going to really let Dan take it over from there. But so Tila Larson, manager of programs at Great Outdoors Colorado, and I have really the privilege of working for an organization that I say is the best thing that Colorado voters ever did. So we are an establishment from the Colorado Lottery. When the lottery system was put into place, obviously the lottery proceeds have to go somewhere, and the voters and legislators decided that that funding would go to support the quality of life in Colorado. And so we're embarking on our 30th year this year, so very exciting. We get a portion of lottery proceeds every year to GOCO. And from that, we have basically 2 funding streams. One is a competitive grant cycle, which is open to certain eligible entities that were established as part of our charter of the state constitution. And then the other half of our funding goes to CPW, so Colorado Parks and Wildlife, as part of our investment plan. And so most folks are probably familiar with the competitive grant side of GOCO. And again, our mission really is to steward the great outdoors of Colorado. So we participate in land acquisitions, trail development, communities, really those built environment community spaces that make communities really wonderful places to live in. We've embarked more recently because we know that now we've gotten to the point in Colorado that our places are being loved to death. And so stewardship related to those places, so taking care of the spaces, doing ecosystem improvements really across jurisdictions throughout the state. And so it's been really exciting to see where GOCO has landed in recent years. I joined this team last year as part of a new strategic plan and operations model that GOCO has redirected itself, and very similar to the Colorado Health Foundation, we're directing our efforts toward equity initiatives and community-centered and authored opportunities. So really looking for, and I will say I came from 10 years as a government cog, right? And I did a ton of park development projects. And in that space, you know, we too did our traditional, like, here's a public meeting and we put some dots on a paper. And now we're really looking to get beyond that and say, you know, how have residents been authentic engaged in the process? How have they participated in decision making related to these amenities? Because we do see true benefits when you have that engagement for a long-term activation and stewardship of those spaces. And so really looking for our communities to come alongside, and I say all the stakeholders, right? And so it is government, it's the residents, it's the businesses, it's the nonprofit industries, working together to bring us their best projects that are going to be transformational for as many residents as possible. And so that's where GOCO has really strategically aligned our funding opportunities, is to work with communities to invest in those types of projects overall.
Great. Thank you. And so Dan, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think Tila described it well, and I'll note too that we do have a brief PowerPoint with some of our programs if there's an opportunity to get into that, if it's better to kind of do a more community discussion, we're happy with that too, but just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, does that make sense? Does that lay the groundwork that can help us keep moving forward with the direction and help people understand a little bit more about what you do?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I really appreciate you sending all those questions ahead of time, and I think that this PowerPoint could certainly, we can keep it pretty brief so that it's more of a dialogue and discussion. But it's certainly, we can be flexible. It's up to you.
Okay. What if it's going to lay the groundwork? Why don't you go ahead and do it, and then we can move through that and then continue asking questions.
Sure. So Tila, I'll share my screen, and then if you want to touch on.
So I'll have you go through to the second, or the slide with the regional officer map. And so I think one of the things we do want to highlight, GOCO did change its model, and we now operate, next slide, Dan, on a regional officer basis. And so Dan is the regional officer for Eagle County. You can see we have 6 regional officers across the state. So they are really tasked with working in community, having a grounded understanding of what the needs are in these areas. And we recognize that, you know, for example, you can look at our Eastern Plains person. She's responsible for, you know, the entire third of Colorado, and recognizing that there are differences in communities within these regions, but really wanting to be able to provide that on the ground touch point for folks. So they're happy to come out, do site visits, learn more about the projects and opportunities in communities. And so really encourage folks to connect with their regional officers. It doesn't have to be that you have an exact project in mind, just to learn more about what we have to offer, or you might have a inkling of an idea of where you want to go, and they're really happy to give you some guidance on the types of projects that, you know, are really competitive within GOCO. So next slide, please, Dan. And as I did indicate, we are chartered by the state constitution. And in that realm, we do have limitations on who is an eligible entity for GOCO. And it's directed to Colorado municipalities, local governments, essentially special districts that have a conservation trust fund element to it. So if you receive conservation trust fund dollars, generally you're also eligible to receive GOCO dollars. And then as well as 501c3s that have a land conservation mission. And so what we really mean by that generally is land trusts. So organizations that it's in their mission to steward land, acquire land, and then of course CPW. So we do have some exceptions to who we can fund. And again, if there's an interest, we can talk later about that. Generally, that encompasses things like schools. So a school is not technically an eligible entity. However, they can partner with the local government to come forward with a project for GOCO. And we often find those are most competitive when that school is really serving for a hub of a community, because it is a rural space maybe, or it's a small location and you don't have parks or other open space opportunities provided by local government. And we want to recognize that the school could be that space for a community. And so we do on a case-by-case basis accept exceptions into our grant programs. Next slide, Dan. And then again, really aligning with our values. And so again, we're mission to take care of our great outdoors. So conservation, stewardship, community vitality. Often that's linked to economic development or quality of life opportunities for communities. Increasing equitable access. Again, recognizing there are certain populations that don't have the same access opportunities as others. And so wanting to increase opportunities for everybody to enjoy our great outdoors, and then the focus on youth, so connecting youth to our outdoor spaces overall. And Dan, I'll have you take over from here.
Sounds good. Thanks, Tila. So I'll kind of fly through these really quickly, and then if folks have questions about them or there's continued interest beyond our conversation today, I'm happy to work with folks to really go through these. And I'd also point out that our website is a really good resource. There's more descriptions about these programs in that sense. So there's 4 base programs that we support with GOCO funding, and the application timeline for that, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But it's these 4 base programs are available 3 times a year. So in August, November, and then February. And they support kind of different elements of those program values that Tila highlighted earlier. So we have a land acquisition program that really supports local governments and land trusts in the acquisition of property. Those could be open space or conservation easements on private lands. We have a really robust community impact program. This is probably one of our most popular pots of funding right now, but that funding is really to help revitalize and develop, parks and trails and schoolyards, fairgrounds, those kind of really necessary community facilities that drive outdoor recreation and access and quality of life in the communities that we support. And then we also have stewardship impact, which is a way of kind of getting beyond the typical kind of one-off conservation projects or multiple groups coming to us for different projects in the same watershed. We really want to be using this fund to support more collaboration and coalition work across watersheds and in regions where groups can come together and get the capacity and support that they need to increase conservation and impact at pace and scale. And then planning and capacity is another really popular program right now. This is funding that can support staff capacity, research, consultants, a really wide variety of funding needs for our partners on the ground. And so this gets beyond kind of site-specific planning, looks at more kind of regional and community-wide issues. And then we've got 3 kind of annual programs. I'm not going to touch on these too much. One of them is the Generation Wild program. This is really our intention to increase equitable access to the outdoors for youth and families in the state. Right now, Colorado youth spend less than 7 minutes of unstructured play outdoors every day. And so we realize that there are significant mental and physical and cognitive health benefits of getting outside and getting that unstructured play. And so we've partnered with a number of organizations, including Colorado Children's Hospital, to really increase the opportunity for youth and families to get outside. We do that both through direct funding through GOCO programs, as well as through community-led coalitions. So there's actually one in Eagle County, Eagle Valley Outdoor Movement, that we funded that continues to work with the community there to get youth outdoors. We also have a fellowship program where we help support roughly 2 to 4 positions a year in natural resource or conservation or recreation organizations, really with a focus of getting non-traditional candidates a seat at the table to really develop professional experience in recreation or the natural resource conservation world. And again, breaking down those barriers and providing opportunities for equity and inclusion within this space. And then the Centennial Program is another really exciting program for Colorado right now. This is funding to support kind of these once in a generation high value projects in communities that have really transformational change. So we've partnered with CPW and some of our other funders to really grow a pot of funding around $100 million that will be available over the next few years to invest in large scale projects. So this is kind of $8 to $10 million, and it can fund things like regional trails or large land acquisitions or the next state park, opportunities to, again, drive community vitality and really kind of unique elements that regions and communities can use to increase access, conserve public land, or really kind of generate kind of that economic driver in their area. And then lastly, we have a couple of partner-based programs. So we work with partners to, we'll fund them and they'll kind of manage these programs. So we have the Restore Colorado program that, again, is really looking to increase conservation and stewardship at pace and scale in our watersheds around the state. And so we've partnered with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, DNR, US Forest Service, BLM, a whole number of funders to essentially make life easier for our partners on the ground. And we do this by, in the past, our partners had to go out and, apply to multiple organizations, trying to get the timing right, manage all these different grants to get this work done. We've taken a lot of that work out of that process, and we've pooled our funding and gotten rid of those match requirements. So we really encourage partners who are in that conservation space and looking at doing projects at scale that are cross-jurisdictional, that have significant impact on our ecosystems, to really check out the Restore Colorado program. And you can access that from both GOCO's website as well as the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And then we also support the Conservation Service Corps through the Colorado Youth Corps Association, providing funding for local governments and partners to utilize these crews of youth and veterans to help support a wide variety of elements. So that could be trail building, fire mitigation, restoration work, kind of different elements of resource needs. And then really quick, just so folks get an understanding of kind of where GOCO has shifted in terms of our application process. We want to be more flexible and adaptive, similar to what Chris was talking about with the Colorado Health Foundation. So we realize that, submitting a 40-page application is a huge lift. And to only do that one time a year, you kind of put all your cards or all your eggs in one basket, and you really hope for the best. We've really gone away from that. So we now have a concept phase where applicants will reach out to their program officers, and I can't stress that enough, really talking about the project. And then if we feel like it's going to be competitive, we'll ask you to put together a 2-page concept paper and a budget. And that will be due kind of that August, November, February cycle. We'll review those as a staff to see what's going to be most competitive. And then we'll invite those competitive applications to come into the full application process. And that will be, again, a much simplified approach, 5 to 6 pages of a narrative, asking a couple of questions, budget and some letters of support, really trying to reduce the burden on our partners to apply and get good funding and put it into important projects on the ground. We'll review those applications with not just our staff, but also outside experts and peers in the industry. And then we'll eventually make recommendations to the programs committee and our board for final decision. So it's usually about a 4-month turnaround from the concept paper to an award decision. So we've really expedited the process and also made it more accessible by increasing the number of opportunities for folks to apply and to be talking with their program officer. And I'll also just, and this is kind of the last slide here, and then happy for discussion, but I just want to also point out that really we're looking for community-driven projects as well. That community buy-in and leadership is really, really critical, especially as we see highly competitive grant cycles. So the more you can get your community engaged, the more you can leverage local funding resources and community foundations and really being able to show that local support. That's really making these projects stronger in the application process. And it's also something that, we realize we want to leverage GOCO dollars. We have limited funding as well as an organization. And so we're really looking to make sure that communities are talking with each other and utilizing local plans. So those could be county comprehensive plans. They could be CPW wildlife plans or a watershed management plan. We want to make sure these communities or projects are falling in line with what their communities are identifying as the need. And then also thinking creatively about some of those leveraging opportunities. So, I have to call out that right now we have the bipartisan infrastructure law that passed, and the hundreds of millions of dollars in funding that is available for communities right now, this kind of once in a generation opportunity. So where can we leverage, some of our funders like GOCO or Colorado Health Foundation or others to really bring some of this money into communities around Colorado? So I will stop sharing. Hopefully that was a good primer.
It was. And before we go to Chris and ask him some of the same questions of what you just went through. So thank you for going through that. One question that I do know is that when Tila talked about who's eligible, and then you were talking about partnering, help the nonprofits understand a little bit more about, how they know whether they qualify or not. Like, let's say they're not a government agency, they're not a land trust. Does that mean they don't qualify at all, or how does that work?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it's kind of on the latter end of the spectrum, Robin. So if you're not an eligible entity kind of outlined in the state constitution, there is an uphill barrier to applying for GOCO funds. We certainly do look for partnership opportunities from the nonprofit community coming into GOCO. And where we've seen great success is, and I'll throw you under the bus, Chris, for this one with the Health Foundation, but it is perhaps, a nonprofit entity has secured funding from the Health Foundation to do some great community-led work. I've done this in Colorado Springs with our local resident-led initiatives down here. And so perhaps it's through youth coalitions or working with some of the marginalized or underserved communities. And so funding from those associations then can get leveraged into coming to GOCO to get the capital work done on the ground. still are limited, again, based on Constitution direction on who can GOCO dollars. But that said, there is this space that I think a lot of foundations are looking to make these cumulative impacts and really see their dollars being leveraged comprehensively.
And so what I'm hearing is if we have a partner, right, that we need to partner with someone that is in the Constitution, that and so that's what we need to look for.
Somewhat, yeah. So there is still going to be limitations on GOCO funding going to some entities. And there is, there is some partnership, I would say, in the stewardship realm, those nonprofits that are directed to doing watershed initiatives or on the ground forest health opportunities. Absolutely, those are the strong partnerships that we're going to be looking for. And then also in the community engagement realm. So we do look for partnerships in that space where we recognize that, our eligible entities are not the ones who may have the trusted relationships on the ground, and wanting to support that resident buy-in and leadership. There often can be an organization that drives resident leadership. And so they can come in partnership with, like, let's say it's a park development project, and that nonprofit partner, we can drive resident leadership to this project, and the local government is saying, and then we're also going to be providing funding, or we're going to seek funding to put that project on whatever residents have identified as their priority.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you. And I'm sure as this sinks in with some of the nonprofits out there, they're probably going to have more questions, but I think that helps, just kind of lay the groundwork. Okay, so Chris, let's go to you and just talk a little bit. You talked a little bit about funding priorities and how those might have changed during COVID. And, do you see those changing more? And, how do we know? Because like GOCO, they're limited as to who that they can give funds to and grants to. So tell me about what COVID's look like and how you all have changed, and then how we would know if we fit.
Yeah, I'll start in terms of like the types of organizations and qualifications, and then kind of expand on that. I would say that any organization, 501c3, 501c4, even if you're informal, in terms of just like a group that comes together, if you can work with the fiscal sponsor, those are all fair game when it comes to whether or not you're eligible to apply. We'll work with you if it comes down to it, when in making sure that we understand like what's your organization's purpose and how does it connect with the community. I would say, as Dan was saying in his presentation, like connect with a program officer first and foremost. Always, if you have a question, reach out to us. The last thing I'd want is for you to spend all that time trying to put together a proposal blindly, really, without talking to a program officer. Our role is to help connect and bridge gaps and help you think about and ask questions to help you think about what the connections are for what we're looking for, what you're looking for, and ultimately what is that impact to community and what are the outcomes that we're looking for. And so that's the big piece. We also work with for-profits to a degree as well too. So there's also small business component. The mechanisms in terms of how we fund look different. And so that there's really, it's all about the conversation, and we will figure out. And again, if it's more, because we can't define, because if a small business is integral for a very small rural community of like 400 people, then we need to really be considerate of like how we're getting our resources out there and how we can work with that. Ideally, 501c3s are kind of the typical, but we are willing to talk and figure out all the mechanisms. Our grants management team has figured out all the ins and outs, and so we can always work with you. The other piece is that we also don't just do grant funding. There's times where grant funding won't align because we have our cornerstones, and that is like what I call is like kind of the minimum bar, the health equity piece, the racial justice, low income, the types of communities, and if you're community informed. And so if let's say you're a new group and you don't meet one of those bars because you're still just getting into a community and learning, we'll work with you in different ways, because we also have the ability to pair you up with a capacity builder or a technical assistance provider that might help. We've worked with organizations where we love their work, but because they were so new or so young or had gone through recent leadership changes that their financials were a little bit in disarray, we paired them up with Nonprofit Finance Fund at our cost to go through all of their financial records, look at what makes sense. We also had groups that came to us where after financial review, we were a little bit curious, like how on earth is this group in their financial situation? We were able, and operating constantly in the red, and we were able to pair them up with Nonprofit Finance Fund to reassess their finances, where they were pulling in income. And 2 years later, they were actually at a surplus because they realized where there were some inadequacies with how they were looking at one of their pharmacies, essentially. And so there's ways that we can get you paired up. We can get you paired up with leadership development coaches if you're an executive director or have staff that want to be able to do that, partnerships. So there's different ways. Ultimately, though, in terms of like how an organization comes to us, we are doing our best to actually tailor our conversation to where you're coming from. It's very much a flip. I'm a former grant seeker. I worked for local government, healthcare, nonprofit. I know what it's like. Either you fit in with what's being prescribed to or you don't. And we're trying to flip that. We have our open funding opportunities, 3 cycles a year, blah, blah, blah. We also have solicited opportunities where we can bring you in whenever, if we feel like it's a strong fit. We have our locally focused work, which goes deep into communities and recognizes that there are other stepping stones for ways to support and build up communities. So it really is that relationship aspect, not transactional aspect that I always experienced myself as a grant seeker. It was when is the door open? Can I peek my head in and slide as much information as possible? I would rather meet with you 4, 5, 6 times. I know there's a couple of folks on this call that I've really gotten to know well, both as professionals and to a degree who you are. And that's what helps. And that's what helps me too when you submit something, for me to go to my team and say, I know more than what they've put down on paper, and I'm willing to vouch and put social capital into this to justify why we need to move forward with this. Or on the flip side, be like, they're still working on stuff. This isn't the right time, but let's get them paired up with XYZ capacity builder or technical assistance provider. So that's kind of our view on this. We've gone through, we're trying to change up our process as well too. Thanks, Amy. And we've really also flipped it where we've had a couple of interesting opportunities that we've reached out to an organization, just asked them a couple questions, went back, and then assessed if they were right for what we had as our criteria on the back end, and then came back to them and said, hey, if we put together a write-up on our end, would you be willing to accept XYZ amount of dollars from us? You don't have to do anything. You don't even have to report. We'll probably just interview you. A lot different than like the proposal and submission process. We've also tried to get creative with what are the true ways we can make an impact. It's not grant making all the time. It's not always providing technical assistance. There's sometimes capital related, there's programmatic related, but then there's just structural related. So recently we had a funding opportunity that just said, hey, let's go out into the community. Let's look at where some of these organizations are that would be typically just overlooked or typically not comfortable or not the right fit and size for funders. And let's see if we can learn from them. It's a lot more legwork on us, but that's the way it should be. We've got the ability and the resources and the privilege to do that. We shouldn't actually expect nonprofits to come to us and give us a polished answer. That's just not fair. And again, I'm used to that. I remember like freaking out about any kind of engagement with a funder. I will tell you, if you reach out to me, I will probably have and present more vulnerability and flaws to you than you will ever think and come up with of yourself, because it's the way it should be. But going back to that equity collective, we looked at these organizations and said, hey, why are you in such a tight financial situation and what can we do? If we gave you $1 million, can we help you create an endowment to create an equity and a surplus that you can base a foundational budget off of that can come in, year out? If we helped you buy property, can you turn that equity into an endowment so then you can invest and then continue growing your organizational wealth? Those are the things that we're starting to look at. That's not just about grant funding, because again, we've got to be good stewards with our money, and we can't go traditional with the way philanthropy's gone, because we know for a fact that hasn't always worked. I'm not trying to say it's never worked, but it hasn't always worked, which is why we're in the situation we are now with many organizations losing staff, closing down, merging. So there's a lot of things that we're trying to stay realistically ahead of the curve on, but we'll always be playing catch up to our community because community is always moving forward before us.
Wow. I love to hear that. And I hope you all heard what all three of them have said about that relationship piece. I mean, when we have funders come on, that's one of the things that they tell us. And sometimes I think those of us in nonprofits are like, but I sent an email and I didn't hear back. And you all are busy. And so, maybe a second email or maybe a phone call and to form that relationship. Because what I hear you saying, Chris, is that you're going to be more than just a rubber stamp, accepted, rejected. and I hear that too from Dan and Tila too, but that you really want to get to know us, our nonprofits, and what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish, and then let you help us fit in with what that you all can fund and help us brainstorm. So I like hearing that.
I mean, ultimately, it's about transparency. I think the big piece is for years, and still currently, we know that. Wow, my computer just froze up. That philanthropy seems to be behind a wall, closed doors. We're trying to avoid that, and so there is a big piece that program officers, we are the face to an extent with community. I will tell folks, and I know folks have heard this from me, I will be your biggest cheat sheet and cheerleader and advocate. I will also be very clear and upfront with you if something doesn't align, but it's never always like a thanks and then walking away, no thanks. Like, you never know if in 2 years that our funding opportunities may shift and change and you do fit in 2 years, and then you're still at a disadvantage because we weren't able to build a relationship during those 2 years. I would still love to grab coffee with you and just catch up about your community and what you're doing, because one, that gives you a chance to share, because that your great work, and two, I get to make sure I know and stay on top of what's that, because if I see something, I might reach out and say, hey, we've got some shifts and changes. Or like in the case of the Equity Collective, hey, we know this group's been working on this. They've been reaching out and talking to us. We haven't been able to have a good fit, but now we've got this really creative opportunity to bring them in. Let's give it a go. So we're constantly trying. We're also constantly learning and getting, oh yeah, that's the other thing. I always tell my folks to push back, challenge me, question me, because I shouldn't be in a position where you can't do that, because I take those notes back to my team too. And so we're always adapting and evolving the way we are here in community.
Right. And I like to hear that because, one of the things I think with GOCO, and I might be kind of off on the date, but you all changed your funding priorities. You really reworked all of that. Was that like last May or June or something like that? I remember you all did some webinars and
yeah, smack dab in the middle of COVID. So we went strategic planning every 5 years. And so it was 2020 to 2025. So in 2020, we launched our new strategies as an organization. But I think, again, it didn't really come to fruition because, like many entities, we shifted our funding to community resiliency and just helping our partners on the ground in a different way during COVID, and then just launched these new grant programs that Dan presented this past year.
Right. And so, yeah, and we know a lot changed during COVID and how funding happened. But, I think, Chris, we could go down a whole path about how philanthropy has worked in the past and how it's working or not working now. And I think one of the great things that happened, if we can call it that, was during COVID that everybody had to just everything was scrambled. So we had to figure out some different ways. And there are things that, we're keeping and things that we're not. But again, the whole philanthropy piece is still not a perfect system. And but I do think it got better because we had to focus more, we as nonprofits and philanthropists, so we all had to focus more on what's important. So I appreciate that. Okay, so I don't know, Tila or Dan, you may want to answer this. Are you all, out of all those programs that you presented, are you specific that, this is only operating, this is endowment, this is capital, or, does it just depend on the project?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll take a first stab at that, and then Tila, feel free to correct me. I would say that it really depends on each project. I think Chris mentioned that too. We want to work with you to really understand what you're trying to achieve, and then discuss kind of what pot of funding to go after in that respect. And we're trying to be really a lot more flexible as grant makers as well. So, we want to be flexible with your budget. We realize that things change in the course of implementing something. And so, we're not going to hold you to specific dollars and cents when it comes to specific line items. And so it's, I think really it starts with a conversation, and then we can figure out, is this a planning and capacity grant, or is this community impact, or what have you, and just kind of take it one step at a time.
And so you talked about, the types of funding. So is there a funding range, dollar amounts that, we could expect, because here in Eagle County, as you know, whether it be Walking Mountain Science Center or Eagle River Watershed Council or Eagle Valley Land Trust have all been funded by GOCO in the past. And I mean, they're pretty large grants. Are we still looking at really large ones? Do you all just want to do large ones, or what's kind of that funding range?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on the program. So planning and capacity, it doesn't have a cap and it doesn't have a floor. So we want to, again, be responsive to what the needs are of our partners. So that one doesn't have a cap. Community impact does. That's kind of $100,000 on the floor end of it, and then up to around $1 million. And those are, again, kind of those larger capital projects and community programs. So we realize that those take a little bit more investment. Stewardship impact, I believe, is between 100,000 and 300,000, kind of in that coalition building space. And then land acquisition is, there's not a floor on that, but, we're seeing around, we've gotten requests anywhere from, 150,000 all the way up to 1.5 million. So we want to be kind of, again, flexible with our grantees. It's more about the program and what you're trying to achieve than it is trying to fit something into our system.
Right. And so even though COVID changed, like your funding priorities, it sounds like dollar amounts have kind of stayed, similar to what GOCO will consider. And so, Chris, what about you all as far as, how much should we ask for? How do we know, kind of where that is?
Yeah, I think with as many open funding opportunities that we have in our 3 cycles, there will be times with certain open funding opportunities where you'll see in the description the length, the max length in the frame in terms of like $80,000 to $200,000. If there's nothing written explicitly stated, that really is something for the organization to sit down and think about. I get this question a lot in terms of, well, how much do you think we should be asking for? And my answer is always one that is very lawyerly. It's, well, it depends on what you're wanting to do, the impact and the reach and the capacity and the resources needed for it, right? You could have an organization that has a $100,000 budget, but because they're trying to make some drastic changes that reaches all of the Latinx, Hispanic community and lots of events, we need to take a look at what those resources require. We also need to look, though, at their operating budget and their staffing. And so that's more on the program officer. I always say, put what you think is reasonable and reflects what you need. We'll have that conversation after the fact. If I feel like that's right, I'll take a look and just go through your financials, but I'll probably have some questions. If I also the basis of where that question comes from, again, because I'm a grant seeker in the past, is will I get funded because am I asking the right amount? And then will I not get funded because I'm asking for too much? And so the question then becomes for me as now on this side is, are they asking that right amount? There's times where we will roll down your requested amount. Doesn't mean we're saying no, but we're thinking, well, we don't necessarily understand why you're paying for 6 full-time FTE when this job and requires, you know, potentially 4. I'll still ask you though, well, why are you asking for 6? But then the other question is this grant is for 3 years. What is your game plan to keep a structure in place to maintain those jobs? Because the last thing I want to do is be the reason why those 6 individuals now don't have jobs after 3 years. The other question is sometimes folks will ask for too little because then they think, well, that makes it more appealing because if I'm not asking for a large amount, I might get this funded. But then you're putting yourself in a bad spot because now you're operating on really thin or negative margins, which is not fair to you, which then makes me worry because then you're going to get burnt out and you're not doing what you really intended to do. That's where then I'm actually like, hey, you asked for $40,000 each year for 3 years. What if it was $80,000 each year for 3 years? Would that give you additional resources to be able to complete and do what you're doing to a successful and less burdensome way? Let's talk some more. So we have the flexibility to consider both up and down. But again, knowing the root of why this question comes about, I don't want that to be the case to hinder or to give you some sort of hesitation about why you should or shouldn't apply. The dollar amount shouldn't be the case. It is more of, are you trying to make that impact into the community that makes the most sense for what your organization is trying to do and what the community is looking for? So that's I'm trying not to build that budget in, but I also know that is a vital and crucial part. So I'm always up for that conversation, and don't be afraid to bring it up. And if you are afraid to bring it up with the funder, most likely should probably ask, what is that funder doing to create that dynamic that's causing you to be hesitant to ask? Because that's a dynamic that shouldn't be there. So I'll get off my soapbox, but that's it is a good question though, Robin.
Well, isn't that great advice though? I mean, as we think about it, you know, because what I tell fundraisers is, you know, if you're afraid to walk in the door and ask for money, have yourself step aside and let your cause walk in the door. And so when they're having that conversation with any of the 3 of you, that's what the conversation needs to be about, you know, what's the impact that they're going to have from the amount of money they're asking for, or that they think it's going to take to do this program. And what I hear the 3 of you all saying is, you know, just talk to us. I mean, tell us what you're doing. Tell us about what you need and what that impact's going to be. And then let you all help us instead of us coming in and either trying to lowball it or how much money can we get from this? So I do appreciate that. Okay, so, you know, Chris, Tila, either one of you all can answer this, or Dan, just whoever. But what are some problems, some shortcomings, some things that when people come to you all and they start describing Chris, or they start describing Dan or Tila, okay, so this is what we want to do. What are some of the problems that you all see that it's just like, whoa, wait a minute?
I can jump in. It is an interesting piece, right? Because I think on your side of the table, you have a lot to account for in terms of how am I coming across that will resonate best with the funder. And so the biggest thing is that, and I remember this, is that I had everything that I thought I needed to talk about and ready to go. And I would say that the piece that is most important to me is to talk about your community and why your organization is doing what it's doing. That is probably the biggest starting point. I think the shortcoming or challenges that I see is that there is a lot of organizational speak first. And again, funders have trained y'all to talk that way, which is really unfortunate. What I want to hear is what's going on in the community and why is this why is this being brought forth, because that's going to reflect your community engagement, your abilities to have worked with the community. I'll know fairly early on if the organization has actually put in the legwork to be out in community and to hear from the community. It's pretty evident. For the groups that I've worked with here, I know y'all have done a great job just conversing in passing. In many rural communities, it's hard. It's impossible not to actually have interaction with your community because you are the community, right? Like that's the biggest piece. So that's probably the biggest hang up. I would say the next biggest hang up is that you haven't thought past 1 year, because again, funders have taught y'all to go 1 year at a time, which is really unfortunate. I want to hear something that's a game plan. If we're trying to change power dynamics and social capital out in communities, that's not going to take a year. That's going to take 5-10 years. So I want to be able to hear, like, what is this building and working toward? It's not just something that is like a one-off thing. Like if the one-off thing helps build that, then sure, but I want to hear more. And I know y'all have more, because again, being on that side, there's always dreams and aspirations. I will challenge you to talk about those dreams and aspirations as part of our getting to know each other, because that'll reflect where you're thinking, and also where I can help you as well too. Because if you're telling me for 1 year, I'm not quite sure I know how to help you, because I'm not quite sure if after a year, if you don't know what you're doing, does your community know what you're up to? And then what are we really trying to do for community? So there's a lot of, that would probably be my biggest piece. And again, I will say funders and foundations have been the root cause of that though. So we're working to change that dynamic.
And so what I'm hearing is that you all will do multi-year grants, right? Good.
I would say I will ask a follow-up question if I hear it's 1 year. We try not to do like individual planning grants, because one, we've got other funders and partners that are in that realm that do provide that. What we want to do is, if we do have a planning, we try to build it in somehow, but really we want to have some stuff that's like ready to take off, because I can guarantee you most of the time that community has been ready to act for a while. They just, one, haven't had the resources, haven't had the ability, haven't had the mechanisms. So we're trying to figure that out. But we also know that there's times where planning needs to happen, because there's a part where we bring the community together to really talk about that some more and document and work with the organization. But yeah, I always tell my groups that talk to me at least 2 to 3 years, ideally 3, because that gives you ramp up and continuation. And speaking of continuation, I'll always entertain additional conversations. Like, just because you applied to us, just because you have an active grant with us, doesn't preclude you from coming in for through another funding opportunity. Just because you have a grant that's wrapping up with us doesn't preclude you from talking to us. Even if you got declined, you can come right back in the next cycle. If anything, you should be, because you should be interacting with the program officer and finding out what the hangups were, so we can help you out. So there's different ways.
Great. So thank you for that, because that helps, because a lot of times, you know how it is, you get funded and then you have to wait a year, 18 months, 2 years, or if you don't get funded, you have to wait that amount of time. So that's great that we can come back. Tila, you put in the chat, community-driven projects led by residents, not a top-down approach. Talk about that just a little bit.
Yeah, so because we traditionally work with local governments, and I think we know how local governments work, they bring us their favorite project without actually getting the resident buy-in and feedback that we're really looking for. And we're really wanting to see the residents at the table in a very meaningful way. They're part of that decision-making process. Perhaps we're part of the implementation and ongoing stewardship of that space. And so really not looking for, the project that's come forward from elected leaders, but from the residents that these projects are meant to serve.
Wow. Very, very good. Okay, so Dan or Tila, as far as shortcomings or things you see that, we come to you and you're just like, what are those types of things that, you're just like, let's go a different direction or whatever?
Yeah, I can take a first stab at that. And my background too, working for a nonprofit, Trout Unlimited, I've been in this grant writing space for a long time and approaching foundations and funders. And so I just want to say too, similar, I really appreciate what Chris said about being open to having these conversations and really being vulnerable, because I'll admit, first off, I'm newer to being a program officer on this side of things. So I really am looking for those kind of candid conversations with partners on the ground and learning about the communities. And so I really want to have those conversations. And that's that gets to one of the first challenges I've seen is, and I experienced this too, as someone who is seeking funds, is feeling like the idea has to be fully flushed out and baked before you go to the funder. And I think that you do yourself such a disservice waiting and holding off and being kind of nervous about having that conversation. And maybe that's just because, you feel like you have to have all this information and be ready to go, as Chris pointed out. But I think, with GOCO and in this role, really we want to be a part of the community as well. And just have that conversation and learn from you all as the experts. And so if you have like an early idea of a need or an opportunity, like we want to hear about that too, because we can help you structure it and make connections and say, oh, so-and-so over here is also talking to us about something similar. Can we connect you to, and maybe, that's an opportunity even without funding, to continue to grow your mission and your project, even before you come in to us with a request. And so I would say that that hesitancy to just have a conversation, I mean, it's really open door. We can talk about the purchase of cats for mental health purposes. That's fine. We can't fund it, but I'd love to hear about it. And then I'd say the other thing too is just selling yourself. I think, again, I've done this a lot, is not asking for enough or selling the project short or coming in just for one element of a proposal. I'll use a park as an example. Like, we don't want to just fund a bike park at a park. I mean, we will if that's like the community need. But, we really want to see, what other amenities does the community want in this space? And we'd rather make a larger investment up front, even if it costs, 3 times what you were thinking. If you have the community behind you and there's an identified need, that's what we want to fund. We don't want you to come back in year after year and kind of piecemeal it. So those would be my 2.
Thanks. And I love the fact that you all have been in our seats, so you know what it feels like, and coming in and asking for money, and how do we do this and how do we frame it. And so thank you all for sharing that, just so that we know that you have been in this same position too. Okay, so I'm going to open it up for questions, and I'm going to keep asking questions as you're welcome to unmute yourself. Just raise your hand or whatever, and I'll unmute you, or you can unmute yourself. And so I'll keep asking questions because I've got plenty, but I know you all probably do too from everything that's been said. So anybody want to ask a question as we continue on? Okay, let's see, Billy.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
I thank you guys for all the information. This has been amazing. And I kind of started my nonprofit. We got our official status less than a year ago, but I've been running the organization. And what it is, I'm opening up a dinosaur museum here in Eagle County. So I've been digging up dinosaurs for over a decade, worked with Denver Museum, worked with National Geographic, and I see the need up here. I've lived in this community in Eagle County for 32 years, and the community's behind it. I mean, 1,000-fold. Everyone wants to be part of it and wants to work on it. The kids want to volunteer. And actually, we just rented a space as part of the Eagle County School District, one of their schools right in the middle of Edwards here. But in reaching out right out of the gates, looking for money and stuff, I'm not a fundraiser. I dig up dinosaurs. I kind of just stumbled into the nonprofit. Everyone's like, you should start a nonprofit. And I went, okay, I inquired about it to my wife's friend, and he's like, well, we do pro bono work. I'll do it for you. And all of a sudden now I have a nonprofit and we have a board, but I don't know how to run a nonprofit. So I'm like trying to raise money, and I'm running into right out of the gates a few times, I should say, is A, you haven't been around long enough. And so the museum's about 2 years old, but the nonprofit's less than a year old. And B, you have no financial history. because I'm brand new as a nonprofit, you know? So it's like trying to figure out how do you get past that when you know the community's behind it. I run a kids dinosaur camp for the last 8 years, and every one of those families can't wait for the museum to open. And there's families that come from all over the world that come to this place to vacation. They all come to the camp year after year. So it's trying to get over those hurdles of, it's kind of a catch-22. You need the money to grow and have a financial history, but you're too young to have financial history. So it's like, how do you get past that? You know, I've had a lot of financial support from the community and a few big businesses, developers here that like, this needs to happen. Even the school board, when I did a big presentation for them to rent the school, unanimously, the Eagle County School Board's like, we need to do this. So now I'm like, well, how do I get the money? When everyone's like, well, you really haven't been around long enough and there's no financial history, so we don't want to give you any money, but you should do this. And you're like, well, how do I do that? I haven't been paid in 2 years. I don't get a salary. I don't do anything. It's all passion, you know, a passion project, but it's like trying to get that money. So how do you get past those barriers?
Great. Who wants to answer that?
I'll jump in. Billy, your situation's not too far off from a bunch of organizations out in rural communities, right? Like, you got your passion, you got folks that are supportive of it, and then you all of a sudden now you're 20 years in, exhausted, and haven't had their formal training because you've done what you could, right? And you've made it work. But that's the piece is I think when you hear questions like that from funders in terms of asking or questioning your viability, and you have to also figure out, like, who are they really asking that for? Is it really about you, or is it about them? And is it about how they are, quote unquote, taking a risk, right? Like, is it something that, and again, this is a place of privilege to say this, is that a type of funder you want to be working for? If they're already looking at you that way, what's to say that they're already not looking at you when you're 2 years down the line with a grant with them, that they're still scrutinizing you? Yeah. And so there's a piece where it's a lot of hard work. I would also say that based on this room, you've got a lot of community partners that have gone through this fundraising exercise, both positive and negative, both positive outcome, negative outcome. I would say reach out to them, ask them who they've talked to, how do they talk to them. This is a community that I've really gotten to know that is helpful. There is a piece of, and especially when it comes to kids, everything's about the kids up there. And so when it comes to trying to look for funding and who to talk to your partners, talk to your community foundation up there. I'm working with them in terms of like how they can be more approachable and how they can provide help and services. And especially for new and young executive directors and new and young nonprofits, there's a lot to be done, but it shouldn't be. We should be figuring out ways to support you. So for us, we've got TA providers and support to get you connected to. Depending on how your organization fits and if it aligns with our cornerstones, we can cover the costs, but at the very least, we can get you paired up and open doors for you to get into and talk to them. There are some groups of TA providers that will provide pro bono or low cost services because you are new, you have a lower budget. They base their it's on a scale. So there's a component to it that's out there. I would say, Billy, don't feel like you're up against the wall on this, man. Like, if anything, as Dan was saying, the least we can do is get you paired up with other folks. The most we can do is maybe figure out how to get you plugged in with some sort of funding opportunity. So don't hesitate to reach out. And Dan, you nailed it. Like, don't feel like y'all have to have some polished full game plan for us. Talk to us. We can help just to at least navigate. And ultimately, all that boils down to developing a relationship with your funder. So that's the big piece.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, great question, Billy. Who else has a question for them, for somebody on the panel? Somebody else? Okay. Wow, we must be asking all the questions and answering them all here, huh? Okay, so as we look at this whole grant funding piece and what you all have shared with us today, if you were to wave your magic wand and you could bestow anything upon these nonprofits that we see here, today, or that talk to you, what would that magic wand bestow upon these nonprofits? Chris, I see you smiling. You got
I feel like I speak up all the time, so I was just giving my GOCO teammates here an opportunity. I mean, imagine I get the question, Robin, but I don't want it to feel like, there's one magical way. Like really, if I did have to distill it, I would just say, don't view us as something of an organization that sits up on an ivory tower. I would say, come to us, talk to us. I mean, if you couldn't tell, like I'm willing to go up there and have some lunch and coffee or a beer, whatever it is that's comfortable for you, or even just hanging out on the phone. If that means, if you're not, I'm an introvert actually. Surprise, surprise. If you just want to talk to me on the phone because you just can't people anymore that day, right? There's different ways. I'll email and anything. Reach out to us, because the last thing that I would want is that you don't know who we are, which we are starting to learn. Just because we assume we're a Colorado Health Foundation that everybody knows what we're about and our stuff doesn't ever get dull. For the most part, I would say majority don't know what we're about, what we do, and who we are. And so I would love to be able to talk to you. I would love to hear from folks like Billy, because you're sitting there thinking, where do I go? Who do I go? Where do I plug into? Who do I connect with? That's what we're supposed to do. A program officer's role isn't just about grant making. It is, at least with what I'm hearing from Dan and over here at the Health Foundation, we're people too, and most of us have shared experience in terms of grant seeking. So we're not going to try and make this some intimidating, anxiety driving process, because that's natural anyways. The last thing we should be doing is adding on to that. So I'd say, if it's a magic wand, try to be more comfortable with us. And the other, it's two wands. Call us out on our shit. Like if I'm saying this stuff and you're like, man, I tried to reach out to Chris and he never responded to me, or I reached out to one of the program officers at the Health Foundation, never got back to me, and Chris is spouting off on how transparent they are. Be like, hey, I tried to reach out to Chris, he never got back to me. Like, reach out to our bosses, reach out to my boss, call me out on it, because again, I need to be held accountable in some way, and y'all are my community, so hold me accountable. I also consider you my peers, because it's just because I'm a funder and you're a grant seeker does not mean that our power dynamic should be any different. I'm not effective unless you're effective as organizations. And so, yes, you need my money, but I need you to be able to carry out what we're trying to do as well too. So it's a mutual partnership. It shouldn't be, I'm better than you because I hold the money. You hold all the actual knowledge of the community. And Dan, you had said that, like, y'all are the community experts. I am not. I'm pretending to be based on how I go into a community because I don't live there. So just, I'm not trying to be like, yeah, we should be like best friends or like Facebook buddies, which is fine if you find me on Facebook. But like, just wanting to take down that facade of like, we're not approachable and we're only approachable during open cycles or whatnot. That's not the case. And I don't want to apologize for the whole field, but I am sorry that's the way that we've been trained. And I say we because I, on the board of a nonprofit kind of thing. Like we know what it feels like, and these dynamics are crummy.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Dan or Tila, if you could wave your magic wand.
I think, yeah, Chris, that was a mic drop moment right there. I don't have too much to add beyond that. I would just take a second to elaborate on that point you made of, just seeing us as people and as part of your community. I mean, there is, I think, that perception of that ivory tower and having to come to us and have your proposal or project fully baked. And I would just say, we as program officers and as funders, we got into this line of work because we want to do something similar that all you are doing. We want to make our communities better places or our watersheds healthier. And this is just, an approach that, as funders, this is part of the equation. And so I think, yeah, just be willing to come to us and have a conversation and build a relationship. And we want to do good too. We're not in this business to say no. So yeah, that would be my suggestion.
Great answers. I didn't know where this was going to go today, but I don't know if all of you all out there feel the same way that I do. that this is just so affirming that you know, they're here for us and to help us as nonprofits. And so I want to thank you all for making us just feel like, you know, you're part of the team here. You know, we're not out here, you know, like Billy was saying, just, you know, floating around thinking, you know, how do we do this and how many grants can we write and all of that. So thank the three of you for being willing. April 28th, put it on your calendar, 1 o'clock to 2:30. And it is going to be very cool because it's going to be unraveling the mystery of digital marketing. And so if you know who Alex Miller is, she works at Vail Health. She used to work at the Vail Valley Foundation, and she is an expert in social media advertising. And then we have Les Reeves. Some of you know him. So he's an expert on being able to take a look at Google and pay-per-click. And then I'm going to kind of be the counterpoint for that with the organic or free social media marketing and help you take a look at some of the things that I teach my clients about, you know, how do we get that following for free. So that's next month. So mark that again, April 28th from 1 to 2:30. And then the next one will be in June. So June 23rd. And so mark that one on your calendar for 1 to 3. So that's going to be 2 hours. And most of you know Emily McGavin, and she is going to share her expertise on the annual giving plan. She is an expert at that. She did it for years at the Vail Valley Foundation, and now she's at the Vail Health Foundation and does the same thing. And so we decided to do a 2-hour program that day because we just know how important that is, and she's got so much great information to share. So put those two on your calendar. But in the meantime, thank you, Chris, Tila, Dan. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being a part of what we do and helping our communities be vibrant. All of us, you can see all the people responding over there in the chat about how appreciative they are for all of you all being here today. So thank you.